Campus police at UCLA have increased security following a weekend of violence amid dueling protests over the war in Gaza. The rally started peacefully, but then shouting matches between pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli protesters turned to pushing and shoving. One woman was either pushed or fell to the ground, hit her head on the pavement. UCLA says it was dismayed that the protests became violent.
You see the tent encampment, the pro-Palestinian tent encampment. It is surrounded by wooden barricades. It is growing larger. And yesterday, there was an opposing or dueling protest by pro-Israel supporters. They used this setup over here, which they left behind with a big video screen. And you can see how these two protests were happening really just maybe 100 yards away from each other or less. And there was bound to be a tension, and things did escalate fairly quickly. On the one side were pro-Israel demonstrators, on the other those who oppose Israel and its war in Gaza. The pro-Israel demonstration was organized by the Israeli-American Council, and it was held right next to the Palestinian Solidarity encampment.
Stop killing children! Stop killing children! Stop killing children!
Egypt, Syria, wages are. We're going to defend ourselves. We will forever defend ourselves.
It's incredibly sad and heartbreaking that there have been innocent lives lost on both sides, but the 133 remaining hostages are not being spoken up for in a loud enough way, and that's why we wanted to come out and represent.
At one point, things got violent. A pro-Israel demonstrator was either pushed or falls to the ground. Later, she was carried out of the crowd with visible injuries to her head. Those on the pro-Palestinian side say the counter-protesters were provoking their peaceful display.
The recent escalation in tensions at UCLA and across the UK highlights the deep-seated conflicts between pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli groups. The weekend of violence at UCLA, where protests over the war in Gaza took a turn for the worse, has prompted increased security measures by campus police. These demonstrations, initially peaceful, soon descended into chaos as shouting matches gave way to physical altercations. A woman was either pushed or fell, sustaining a head injury upon hitting the pavement. UCLA's administration expressed disappointment over the turn of events, condemning the violence that marred the protests. At the heart of these protests is a growing pro-Palestinian tent encampment, now surrounded by wooden barricades and expanding steadily. Pro-Israel demonstrators set up nearby, their proximity adding to the inevitable tension. With the two groups separated by just about 100 yards, the atmosphere was ripe for conflict. The pro-Israel demonstration was organised by the Israeli-American Council, taking place right next to the Palestinian Solidarity encampment. The scene became charged with slogans and chants from both sides, with pro-Israel supporters decrying violence against children and asserting their right to self-defence.
7 months on, they're still marching for Palestine. With no let-up in Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip, protesters from across the country gathered in London.
The good people of this country want a ceasefire, and they want the arms trade to Israel to come to an end. The good people of this country want peace, and generally I'm disgusted to be British because of the politicians, but when I come here today and see such a diversity of people from all faiths and all backgrounds, it makes me proud to be British.
Saturday's demonstration was the 15th since last October. In recent months, dozens of UK university campuses have seen pro-Palestine encampments spring up, and public opinion has swung strongly behind a ceasefire.
People that weren't sure about it are now understanding what's happening. They're learning, they're asking questions. At my workplace, I've been asked questions. People want to know. I'm a teacher, and children want to know. And I think it's inspiring.
This might just be the latest in a series of pro-Palestine marches, but here in Britain, we're in the middle of a general election campaign. These demonstrators know it's an ideal time to make their voices heard.
The Labour Party is expected to form the next government following next month's general election. Its leader Keir Starmer is expected to promise to recognise a Palestinian state. But his perceived slowness to back a Gaza ceasefire has dented Labour's popularity in some areas with large Muslim communities.
Labour is looking at the electoral map and knowing there are some key constituencies that they may lose. So we have to keep the pressure up before the election and after the election.
Across the Channel, thousands of people took to the streets of Paris in solidarity with Palestine. Just like here in the UK, they're determined to keep marching until the killing in Gaza comes to an end. Nadeem Barber, TRT World, London.
The situation escalated when a pro-Israel demonstrator was injured and had to be carried out of the crowd. Both sides blame each other for the violence, with pro-Palestinian participants accusing the counter-protesters of provoking them. This incident at UCLA is reflective of a broader pattern of confrontations between these two factions, not only in the United States but also in the UK. The UK has seen its share of violent clashes as well. The government, led by then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, has taken a hard stance against those inciting violence during these protests. Measures have been put in place to ban visas for individuals who promote violence, and there are even discussions about possibly banning protests altogether due to the breakdown of law and order they often cause. Pro-Palestinian protesters have been particularly noted for instigating conflicts according to some perspectives, as they push back against the government that has labelled their group a terrorist organisation. It's distressing to witness injuries and chaos at events meant to express deeply held beliefs. The University of California Police Department had to bring in extra security, and officers appeared in riot gear, though no arrests were made. UCLA reaffirmed its commitment to respectful engagement, lamenting the breach of community safety. Aerial footage from Sky HD the next morning revealed the scale of the pro-Palestinian encampment, now over 50 tents strong. The university has not indicated any immediate plans to dismantle it. Meanwhile, remnants of the pro-Israel demonstration, including a video screen showing clips of the Hamas attack on Israel, were left in place, further inflaming the situation.
It's a familiar chant heard in London for months, but now aimed at a new government. Those marching here want Britain's incoming Prime Minister to know they want him to do more to help end the war in Gaza.
So what we want to see from Keir Starmer is pretty much the opposite of what he put in his manifesto. We want him to call and demand an immediate ceasefire. We want him to stand up to Israel. We want him to halt all arms sales to Israel immediately.
But among the crowd, there's scepticism.
I have very little hope. We've got an international human rights lawyer who has actively tried to prevent a ceasefire vote in government, which I find horrific.
I don't really feel much hope that there's going to be much progress. But, you know, being here today, that's what fills me with hope, and yeah.
And for some here, Labour's ascent to power makes little difference.
Well, many attending here today say that they have always traditionally backed Labour, but they are unhappy with the new Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer's stance on Gaza, because they say that his party's approach isn't all that different to the previous Conservative government's approach. And they also have a problem with the fact that while Labour committed to recognising the Palestinian state, they have not said when they would do that.
And that approach has cost Labour 4 seats in some of its traditional heartlands, with even a shadow cabinet minister removed by an independent candidate supporting Palestine. Though Gaza was not all these challenges campaigned on.
I ran on a combination of foreign policy, peace and justice, no to genocide, no to arms sales to Israel, and also the deprivation in our community and trying to get investment and opportunities for our children.
Make some noise for Tyrese!
The new British government will have its work cut out on the economy and the high cost of living. But people marching here want to make sure that with other pressing issues, the war in Gaza is not forgotten. Milena Veselinovic, Al Jazeera, London.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.
In the UK, a pro-Palestinian demonstration in Westminster led to injuries and numerous arrests. The event, organised by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, drew about 10,000 participants. The police response was substantial, with officers' leave cancelled to manage the crowd. The violence that erupted left 3 officers injured, one seriously. The sight of a young female officer injured by a thrown bottle underscored the physical risks faced by law enforcement during these protests.
As distant struggles become shared sorrows.
Long live Palestine! Long live Gaza!
Ripples from the Israel-Hamas conflict feeling closer than ever in the largest protest since last weekend's atrocities.
We are all Palestinians!
Thousands of pro-Palestinian supporters marched to Whitehall in London, all we spoke to wanting the same thing, an immediate ceasefire. Katie's Jewish. She's travelled from Hastings to be here.
Palestinians have been screaming for decades about this and no one was listening. And in our silence, they experience violence on a daily basis. I'm speechless.
Nara Main says people in Gaza shouldn't be punished.
It's appalling. What happened last Saturday makes me feel... I was shocked, really shocked. But what I'm seeing now is just war crime from Israel.
1, 2, 3, 4!
In other UK cities, protesters also made their voices heard. A police presence in each. And in London, 1,000 extra officers on the streets.
The language used around this conflict is so important, and the police have been extremely careful in their wording, describing themselves as independent and impartial as a service. However, they've also warned that anyone showing any support to any terrorist organisations will be arrested.
While mostly a peaceful protest, there were disagreements in the crowds, where Sky News witnessed a man appearing to hold a Hamas flag. On stage nearby, calls for the UK government to intervene.
Let's hear it for the people of the West Bank, for the people of Gaza, for the people of the refugee camps, and say very bluntly to our political leaders in this country, do not condone war crimes.
With the Palestinian ambassador thanking protesters.
Even now, when we feel isolated, abandoned, that so many of you are prepared to come out in support of Palestine, of justice, in support of law, in support of what is right, in support of peace, make your voices heard.
With more protests planned, there's momentum on both sides.
All of Gazans are humans like you!
A conflict continuing to resonate far beyond its original borders. Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Public sentiment is increasingly calling for a ban on such marches. The argument is that the ongoing clashes drain police resources and put officers at undue risk. There's a sense that the constant protests have become too much to handle, leading to widespread calls for stricter measures. The police and the public are growing weary of the recurring violence, with many feeling that the situation has reached a breaking point. The metaphor of two elephants fighting and the grass suffering aptly describes the current scenario. The protesters and the police are the elephants, while the grass represents the general public caught in the crossfire. Injured officers and civilians bear the brunt of these conflicts, leading some to call for a total ban on protests. However, this is not a simple solution. Banning protests could lead to even more unrest, as people would likely react strongly to what they see as a suppression of their democratic rights.
People's Republic of China pursuing
Russia was 6 years old when Israelis killed her. Hit Russia was 6 years old. Lincoln, you will be remembered as the butcher of Gaza. You will be remembered for murdering innocent Palestinians.
If anyone who's speaking, will please be removed. Mr. Secretary, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I was saying, the People's Republic of China.
He is a war criminal. He is a war criminal. The blood of 40,000 people is on his hands. The blood of 40,000 Palestinians is on his hands.
This is of our time. The President's FY25 budget.
Funding a genocide in Gaza. There have been 7 mass graves outside of hospitals. This is sick. This is deranged. You are a war criminal. Shame on you.
In the Middle East, we're standing with Israel in its efforts to ensure that what happened on October 7th never happens again, as we do everything we can to bring an end to the terrible human suffering in Gaza and prevent the conflict from spreading.
The Sunak government faced a dilemma. On one hand, they needed to maintain public order and protect law enforcement officers. On the other hand, they must respect the right to protest. The challenge lies in distinguishing between peaceful protesters and those who seek to incite violence. This distinction is crucial but difficult to enforce, ensuring that those with genuine grievances can express them without fear of violence or repression is a delicate balance to strike. One of the core issues is the diverse motivations of the protesters. Many participants genuinely wish to express their views peacefully. However, within these groups there are always individuals who aim to cause trouble, flouting dispersal orders and engaging in unlawful activities. This makes it challenging for authorities to manage protests without infringing on civil liberties.
Tens of thousands marched through London. This, the first large-scale pro-Palestinian demonstration since ugly scenes in the capital on Armistice Day. Leaflets handed out by police warned anyone inciting hatred would be arrested. Along the route, police from forces around the country had been brought in to support the Met.
Well, they're doing their job and we're doing our job. It's not a hate march because you can see it's really peaceful.
Nothing's going to happen. Everything's fine. It's peaceful.
But away from the main march, a separate, much smaller protest organised by Hizb ut-Tahrir, the same group that held a demo last month where the word jihad was chanted. There were tears for Palestinian children, but police on alert. 2 women were pulled over by officers and asked to translate their banners.
The best translation would be, who will roll up the sleeves for heaven?
But without an independent interpreter on the ground, police asked the women to wait. This is an example of the difficult balancing act police have, allowing free speech, but not allowing anything that incites hatred or promotes terrorism. After several minutes of confusion, they arrested them.
You're under arrest on suspicion in Section 4A, Section 4A, aggravated public order.
How can you arrest us for
It's not
something you don't know what
anything,
it
but it may
means,
harm the
though?
defence.
They were taken to a police station for questioning. Back on the main march, demonstrators said protests will continue until there's a permanent ceasefire, not just a temporary halt to the fighting.
It's a pause, it's not a ceasefire. We want Israel to stop bombing Gaza. That's why we're out. We want peace, that's what we're out for.
And organisers defended the rights of the protesters.
We have very clear laws that define what is and what is not acceptable. The police's job is to implement those laws. They have been policing these marches they have had to arrest a handful of people. We know they're under huge political pressure, including people who are trying to conflate anti-Semitism with legitimate advocacy for Palestinian rights.
But those suspected of crossing a line were taken away by officers. Proactive policing after criticism by some of too little intervention at previous protests. And at the end, a small group causing trouble faced a robust response. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Central London.
Civil liberties groups often challenge government clampdowns on protests, sometimes winning in court. This legal pushback complicates the enforcement of stricter measures. In the case of the injured police officer, her serious facial injuries highlight the personal toll on those tasked with maintaining order. The photographs of her injuries and the significant cost of her dental repair underline the risks police officers face. The broader debate about how to handle such protests touches on the adequacy of police training and compensation. Many argue that officers are neither adequately trained nor compensated for the dangers they encounter during such volatile situations. The government's response to this ongoing issue is under scrutiny, with calls for more robust measures to ensure both public safety and the right to peaceful protest.
The Israel-Hamas war stoking protests across the U.S. at various college campuses. In the Northeast, a pro-Palestinian demonstration at Brooklyn College. And at Columbia University, massive crowds as supporters of both Israel and Palestinians held competing protests. Columbia, open your eyes! In the nation's capital, American university students gathering in solidarity with Israel.
The horror has reached an unimaginable level.
While supporters of Palestinians made their presence known.
It's scary. I mean, I walked up here with my flag on and I instantly took it off because, you know, people are telling you to be careful.
At UNC Chapel Hill, tensions boiling between supporters of the two sides. Arizona State University Students for Justice in Palestine holding a rally today outside the Student Union, one day after the school's Hillel Jewish organization held a vigil in support of Israel. The school acknowledging the distress and concern caused by the week's events in a statement, but some Jewish students say it doesn't go far enough.
There was no real statement saying what happened was wrong, which I think is stressing out a lot of the Jewish students.
A war of words also playing out in statements from student groups and university's leadership. The University of Florida president issuing a viral statement saying in part, quote, "There is no defense for terrorism. This shouldn't be hard." The NYU Law Student Bar Association president possibly out of a campus title and future job offer at a law firm for writing "Israel bears full responsibility for Hamas's attack" in a weekly bulletin, leaving some of the school's Jewish community on edge.
I've honestly been avoiding campus. I didn't go to class this afternoon.
The Student Bar Association voting to start the president's removal process as a result, and NYU condemning the terrorist attack on Israel in a statement.
The pro-Palestinian protesters, often accused of being provocateurs, argue that they are merely defending their rights and views. The Israeli population at institutions like UCLA feels threatened by the support for groups they consider terrorist organizations. This mutual distrust fuels the cycle of confrontation. The pro-Israel demonstrators at UCLA aim to counteract the pro-Palestinian narrative by highlighting the atrocities committed by Hamas. Yet these efforts often fall on deaf ears, as both sides are entrenched in their positions. At the core, these conflicts reflect broader geopolitical tensions. The war in Gaza is a flashpoint for deep-rooted animosities and ideological divides. The local manifestations of this global conflict, such as the protests at UCLA and in the UK, bring these issues to the forefront of public consciousness.
At Harvard, its Palestinian solidarity groups initially releasing a joint statement holding the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all the unfolding violence.
At the end of the day, this is a group that seeks the destruction of the Jewish race, and it's not the right time to be issuing a pro-Palestinian statement.
Backlash quickly ensued, a professor posting a photo of a truck driving around campus showing photos, which he redacted, of some of the students who signed the statement. Some groups formally apologizing and retracting their signatures temperatures, while over 4,000 members of the Harvard community signed a counter statement.
There's a lot of tension. A lot of people have missed class.
Harvard's president condemning the terrorist atrocities perpetuated by Hamas, emphasizing that the student body does not speak for Harvard University.
I feel like Harvard very visibly and loudly stood by Israel, but I don't hear the same frustration for the blood that's been shed for the Palestinians.
Students across the country wondering whose voices will be loudest.
Valerie Castro joins us now from our studios in New York. Valerie, with so many demonstrations around the country there, are there concerns that things could become violent? We know a former Hamas leader has called for Friday to be a global day of anger. Is the NYPD doing anything to prepare for that possibility in New York?
Well, Allison, we should say for the most part, the protests and rallies, though they have been tense, they have remained relatively peaceful, or at least without any major violence. But an NYPD spokesperson tells NBC New York that all officers will be in uniform tomorrow around the city, and there will be added patrols in key areas, including schools and houses of worship, as a precaution. New York Governor Kathy Hochul spoke just within the last few hours at a press conference. They were discussing plans to ensure the safety and security of New Yorkers. She had some very strong words. Take a listen.
I want all New Yorkers to feel confident going to a synagogue, going to school, walking to the streets of New York and throughout our state over the next few days. And those who seek to use Hamas's violence as justification for violence of their own, we have no tolerance for your hate. I condemn violence of every kind in New York. And I want to be clear. When I say every kind, that's exactly what I mean.
The governor also went on to condemn any hate directed towards Palestinian New Yorkers, saying, quote, a community that is cherished and respected in our state. It's important to note the NYPD says it has not received any new specific or credible threats. Similar security measures are being taken in other large cities around the country, including around the D.C. area.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.
The question remains, how can such conflicts be managed in a way that allows for peaceful expression without descending into violence? It's a challenge for educational institutions, governments, and law enforcement agencies alike. The approach must balance respect for free speech with the necessity of maintaining public order and safety. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel.